You have to delegate. You have to delegate. And I'm really bad at delegating, you know, so who am I to say? I just one of the books I love the most about business and workplace and all that is Sam Carpenter's Work the System. And that is a great story about someone who was really bad at delegating for different reasons, I think, and got really good at it. And you know, he was this you know, more of a kind of leader type, more of a kind of bombastic, you know, I'm going to conquer the world with my telecommunications company. Is that what it's called? No, it was like customer service thing. Other businesses would hire his businesses to get someone who can, you know, answer the phones for them. And he bought this business, and he was trying to make it work, and he spent like, I don't know, what was it, 15 years or so, driving himself into the absolute ground eventually. And yeah, so he was this big, like, you know, fire killer. He would be killing fires all over the place. You know, he was like the key bottleneck of it all. You know, stuff would go wrong randomly, and he'd just jump in and solve it. And he went through times of, you know, sleeping under his desk and all that kind of stuff. Like, I think he even had his kid living in his office at one point. Sounds like that was after the divorce of the man's first wife there. So turbulent time, right? Really turbulent, and a long time, and his health was breaking apart, all that stuff, blah blah blah. And then there was a big change, right? The big change where he figured out, sounded a bit Trumpy in there. The big change is where he was like, he looked at his business as if it was laid out in front of him from a position of slightly elevated and to the side, is how he described it, you know, in his kind of dark night of the soul, thinking, you know, he wasn't going to make payroll again, and what was he going to do, etc. And he realized that, you know, each part of the business was a component that he could isolate and pick out and work on, make it perfect, document how to do that thing perfectly, and then put it back into the system. And then look at the other thing, pick that up, look at it, you know, tinker with it, figure it out, make it perfect, document that, put it back in, and keep going until the whole thing is running super smoothly. Now, you know, one way that, you know, that kind of a thing is often ends up getting kind of documented, placed on a shelf, and they're not really looked at again, is the problem. But he was able to, you know, structure incentives to kind of, yeah, to incentivize people to keep adding suggestions to improve the systems. And so they were, you know, engaging with it more just through that. Plus, it was a kind of business that you could, for most of the things, you could figure out how to do it once, and then it's basically done. There are other kinds of businesses where that isn't the case. You know, businesses are almost like the natural world, right? It's almost like there's a niche. You know, they would even call it niches. They called it, I think that first came from ecology, and you know, all organisms have a niche, and they're all super different. And then you have, you know, individuals of type of species that are similar. Nothing's identical to anything else, but they're all very similar. Like, you know, all the kiosks out there, all the coffee shops, they follow a certain kind of certain pattern, just like trees follow their certain pattern. Anyway, so when it comes to delegating, right, this guy, he loved to do it all. He loved to be the hero, as he says. He was swooping in to save the day all the time. And when he, but ultimately he didn't want to spend his whole life doing all this stuff. And so for him, it was a huge relief figuring out that he could hand it over. He could hand stuff over to other people. And his method was to do that, to pick a piece of it out, do it himself, figure out how it can be done perfectly, do it, and then do it with somebody else. He said big problem that he had doing this was, first of all, thinking that he was the one who had to write everything, and then realizing actually it's much better if you get other people to do it, because, you know, then they feel like it's theirs. But anyway, his example was this banking system where the invoicing system, which, you know, where checks had to be deposited to the bank or whatever, you know, physically, back in the long before times when there was physical checks you had to take to the bank. But anyway, sometimes it would just get lost under people's seats, you know, under some car seat. I think there was a big old check under someone's car seat for months, because it was just random people would do it randomly. So, you know, figuring out, I think it ended up being 18 steps from start to finish to properly deposit a check. And he said the sense of relief handing that over, because it was one of the biggest stresses of his day-to-day. You know, and I'm just thinking, because I'm working on the finance function in the company I work for. I'm chief of staff for a young company, just, you know, hit 10 years recently, and yeah, I feel like it's the final function that isn't, you know, properly professionalized yet, is the finance function, and I'm in that with no background in finance or accounting or anything, and so I kind of relate to old Sam there. But anyway, he was so he finally handed this over, right? He just handed it to somebody else, and then it was just done, and it would always be done forevermore, perfectly. You know, it doesn't quite work out that way in reality, but it's a necessary step to getting things under control. Is to, you know, get the things that add to the stress the most, add to your stress the most, and sit with it quiet. Just make time for it. If you don't have the time, you got to make the time, because this will save time later. So if you don't do it now, you know, it's only going to compound and be worse. So you got to make the time for it, sit down with it, and work it out, and really get it smoothed out, and then work on it with somebody else, and then you hand it over to that person. And in terms of making sure he engages with it further and, you know, improve on it over time, that's a separate issue. But at least that first step definitely needs to be taken, and often, or sometimes at least, that's the only one that needs to be taken for it to be handled and delegated forevermore. All right. I'll leave it there. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.